Hi, I'm Ahmed Shawky, the Managing Director of LevelUp ESG, and welcome to our inaugural episode of LevelUp ESG Podcast. ESG has been a topic of intense discussions with diverse perspectives flying around, while some have tried to rebrand or repackage it, regulations and stakeholders' expectations continue to rise globally. Today, we have the privilege of delving into the trends shaping corporate sustainability and ESG governance with a global ESG expert, Aya Kiy-Morrocco. I'm excited to welcome Aya, a distinguished professional in ESG governance, as the head of ESG governance at Cognizant, a leading technology service company. Aya leads their award winning ESG reporting team committed to elevating the company's sustainability disclosures, practices, and ratings. With a wealth of experience in the regulatory affairs and compliance at companies like BlackBerry and several technology startups, Aya's insights are invaluable. Her work driving ESG strategy and performance has been recognized by leading analysts like Verdantex's Corporate Secretary and GRC 2020. Aya's profound expertise across ESG governance, compliance, and reporting positions her as the ideal guest to share powerful insights on the trend shaping ESG governance. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to gain her perspective on the show today. Aya, it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Dr. Ahmed. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited to be a part of your inaugural episode.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time. Let's dive into this fascinating conversation. So, Aya, you have got your finger on the pulse of ESG globally. Could you please paint us a picture? How would you describe the current state of ESG and where do you see corporate sustainability heading for the rest of 2024 and beyond?
Great question. I would say, in one word, uncertain. But by no means do I mean uncertain as regards the future of sustainability and ESG. I think it's quite clear. The market and investors have made it quite clear that sustainability and ESG are here to stay as part of the corporate story and the corporate journey. What's uncertain is the regulatory landscape. We've seen a lot of new regulations coming in. So, for example, I'm based in the US. Here,
Yes.
we saw California start off with their climate rules back in October of 2023. Now, those pieces of legislation passed. However, Governor Newsom has yet to allocate funds to an enforcement mechanism. So, what does that mean? We have to wait and see. Another example in the United States, the Securities and Exchange Commission just came out with their proposed climate rule, no longer proposed, their climate
Yes,
rule.
it
And
is.
after over a year of debate and conjecture, it's finally here. And yet the rule is paused. Why? Because industry groups along with states have gone ahead and sued the SEC. So until we get a little more clarity in the legal landscape, we really don't know what those regulations are going to look like once the ink dries and how they're going to be enforced. A little different is Europe. In Europe, we saw the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, pass. And we've seen countries go ahead and transpose that law at the national level. So, for example, in France, they've really put some teeth behind it. If you do not comply with CSRD, what can happen is not only fines, as one would expect, but the directors of non-compliant companies can actually face jail time in France.
Mhm.
So you see Europe taking a much more harder stance, if you will,
Yeah.
against non-compliance. So it is still up in the air how these regulations will look once they are completed. We've got several EFRS regulations still being drafted. However, I think, as I said at the beginning, the market has made it quite clear that ESG and sustainability is not going away. It
Oh,
is now part of the landscape. And I think that companies simply have to accept that and just look at what is this going to mean for us and for us in the next 2 to 5 years and for us in the longer term.
Thank you. So ESG is here to stay. There has been a lot of debate about whether ESG is a burden that distracts from the bottom line or a huge opportunity. So, in your view, is it possible to serve both purpose and profit?
Absolutely. I think that, this was very well demonstrated back in 2019 when we saw Larry Fink's letter come out to the board of directors, his annual
Mhm.
letter from BlackRock, essentially saying that we want to see companies disclosing transparently how they are planning in the medium and long term against climate risk and other pillars under ESG. And the reason for this is having this information allows investors to make better decisions in the medium to long term. To give a very, let's say, a realistic example, if a company, say an IT services company like Cognizant,
Mhm.
we're not looking at its climate risk. Let's look at what could happen, right? This is a hypothetical, but it's rooted in reality. We have data centers all over the world. We have a heavy presence in India. And what happens when flooding strikes or
Mhm.
another natural disaster strikes? And we are seeing events happening more often and
Mhm.
having worse effects, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so when your data centers flood, how will you be able to service your clients? It will directly impact your bottom line. And this is simply just at the corporate level. We can also think about our workforce, right? We've
yeah,
seen that, particularly when it comes to Gen Z and younger generations, these these ages are really looking for guidance and leadership from their own companies when it comes to sustainability. They want to work for a company
yeah.
that gets it, a company that is planning for the future of our world and for the future of the workforce as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that it is not only possible to serve both purpose and profit, but I think that's what's necessary going forward.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. We all have noticed the extreme weather events happening everywhere, including in Europe, in London. The summer has been really summer here in London, and it exceeded 40 degrees to an extent where the railway system has to stop and was totally halted for a number of days in the summer. And also, in terms of the future of work and the younger generation being really focused on purpose than money, and we have seen that across the globe. Thank you for highlighting that. So, in terms of, let's talk about leadership. As a leader and the ESG governance leader, what role do you think the board, its committees, and C-suite need to play in driving ESG performance and strategy? And what advice would you give?
I think it's very important that the board be involved in steering a company's ESG initiatives, targets, and overall purpose, right? The A company's approach to sustainability should always be linked to its business strategy. Sustainability approach should always be linked to its business strategy, and the board has a huge role to play there. I think one thing to keep in mind is it's going to be increasingly important for board members to be educated in this space and to
Mhm, mhm,
understand what that means in terms of discharging their oversight responsibilities. Uh, at Cognizant, for example, we have our programs, our report, our initiatives, our targets reviewed by the board regularly. We have a governance and sustainability committee, and they're responsible for overseeing Cognizant's approach to broad ESG matters.
mhm,
These include our net zero goal, physical climate risk, as well as reporting. Um, Further to this, the audit committee is responsible for overseeing the company's enterprise risk assessment and management framework. And so this includes processes for identifying, assessing, monitoring, as well as mitigating key business risks. And this
mhm,
includes ESG risk.
mhm,
Part of Cognizant's global business resiliency program is how we respond to extreme weather. And that includes weather events and that are made more likely by climate change. It's always going to be important for the management tier to have dedicated resources to governance, at the operational level. It's going to be important at the executive level, for a CEO, for example, to have overall responsibility for addressing climate risk, as well as facilitating climate related opportunity. Day to day responsibility generally would sit with a chief sustainability officer that would work closely with the CEO. These are the folks that would be responsible for embedding climate consideration throughout Cognizant's business, including orchestrating the execution of emissions reduction targets, for example. But at the end of the day, in order to make sure that the business is aware of risks and opportunities, and that the business understands how the company is doing in terms of meeting its targets, and any other public commitments that they've made to the marketplace, the board's got to be involved.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. Moving from, the C-suite, the board and its committees and the C-suite now to, you also have multiple hats, as a compliance and legal professional. What do you think that compliance and internal audit professionals should play in driving ESG performance?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, certainly, compliance roles like internal audit as well as finance are going to have a much bigger role in
Mhm.
ESG and sustainability within a company. As far as driving the performance, I think their role is a little less strategic. I mean, the driving should come from leadership and management. However, when it comes to disclosures about performance, internal audit, compliance folks, finance folks are going to have a huge role to play, because we are finding that the market is changing and the market is getting smarter. It's more sophisticated. The audience is broader, and it understands, some of the more technical elements in disclosure. This means that there's going to be less and less room for greenwashing. And we see this already in the United States, where many companies have been sued for claims they've made in their ESG reporting that they're unable to back up with evidence. And so it's going to be key to bring in these compliance folks to ensure that a company has appropriate controls and processes in place to ensure data integrity of the claim, of the data that flows into the claims in any disclosure that they're making. I think that there will be a lot of give and take between leadership and management and compliance folks, because I found in my own practice, for example, there may be areas where we would like to disclose more information, and yet we don't have the structural maturity in place yet to do so accurately, completely, and in a way that's relevant to our stakeholders. So sometimes, because of our risk appetite, we need to wait a little bit and mature our own organization before we're able to make those disclosures in a way that will satisfy our compliance and governance folks internally.
That's great. You mentioned the greenwashing, and just in Europe, this month, there has been a case in the news, the KLM case,
That's
and the biggest case also happened in 2020 during my doctoral research, when I was exploring how can we mitigate greenwashing, was DWS in Germany. So there has been, greenwashing is rampant, happening everywhere, and companies have to take measures and actions to mitigate that. And I think as professionals, we have a role also to help them. You mentioned the second element is data. Data and technology. So I'd like to get your views. You have spent over 2 decades now in technology space, from tech startups to Cognizant. So what role would technology help? So in helping companies really perform better and better manage their data, their ESG
Oh my
data
goodness.
specifically.
I think technology has a huge role to play. And I'd like to address this on two levels. One level is helping to automate processes and therefore reduce human error, right?
Yeah.
So this can be things like reporting technologies that are helpful in keeping track of all of the data, keeping track of the evidence, ensuring that your reporting is trackable, auditable, repeatable, and there's
Comparable.
yes. So there's that whole element. But there's also a larger element of how does we talk a lot about Gen AI these days, but how can AI help companies as
Mhm.
well? And I think we're going to be finding in the coming years that AI has a larger and larger role to play in identifying gaps, helping identify gaps, helping to helping companies benchmark against their peers. I mean, there is just a wealth of information out there, and we know that AI is very good at parsing through it. So let's put it to work. Let's see where, how AI can help us identify things like where your current disclosure, for example, may meet certain pieces of regulation. Perhaps you're doing great on SEC reporting, but you've got gaps in CSRD. Or, it may be able to help you prepare for reporting that's coming from, Asia Pac, for example. I mean, we haven't seen a whole lot of regulation yet, but it's in the pipeline, and we don't know yet what that's going to look like. But AI could help us project different scenarios,
Mhm.
and help us
Yeah,
prepare for those.
yeah.
So I
Predictive
think,
analytics. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I think technology has a huge role to play, and particularly for small to medium enterprises that may not have the resources or the bandwidth in place yet. It's going to be technology that helps bring them to the next level and helps them move forward in their journeys.
I'm glad you mentioned SMEs because they are usually overlooked. Uh, I believe that they are really underserved in that space, although they represent over 90% of businesses globally, and they generate over almost 50% or over 50% of the global emission. And there is little resources available out to them. Thank you for bringing that. Are there any further tips or recommendation from your experience? Because I know that you started in technology startups and you also
Mhm.
have the experience in global firms. Is there any recommendation that you would like to give SMEs in that space, especially now, although that there is no direct regulation, but I think in the value chain of large organization, they might be impacted, their business might be impacted in the long term. So what recommendation or advice would you give SMEs owners?
Absolutely. First, I would say that SMEs should be well aware of the ESG and sustainability environment because, as you mentioned, these SMEs make up over 90% of the market. And so
Yeah.
they are, therefore, part of the supply chains of the larger global companies that are coming under regulation. And those companies are going to want to work with vendors that are aligned to their values, aligned to the way that they see the sustainability journey going. And so there absolutely needs to be preparation on the part of SMEs, even though they are not directly impacted by regulation. What I would also say is it can be very overwhelming to get started in this place, particularly, as I said, when you have limited resources, limited staffing. Where do you start? And I think for SMEs in particular, it will be super helpful for them to start with identifying their stakeholders, right?
Mhm.
Who are your stakeholders? Investors, your employees, your clients. Go ahead and identify your stakeholders. From there, create and execute a stakeholder assessment. Understand what are the priorities of your stakeholders. And that will allow you to focus your programs, right? You don't have to throw the kitchen sink at it, and that would actually be quite irresponsible. It's in such a landscape of uncertainty. You need to be able to find some guideposts to help you along the way. So where do you start with your stakeholders as priorities and focus on those, and that will give you the ability to focus on what matters most, and you can always start building from there, right? It's a journey, it's not a destination. You're supposed to improve year on year, and really, I think that's what the market wants to see. whether it's from huge Fortune companies or
Mhm.
small to medium enterprises.
That's spot on. Thank you. Thanks for that. As we conclude our discussion, and it has been really insightful, are there any final thoughts you would like to share with our audience?
I would say get started and get started early on your sustainability journey. It is an incredible amount of work, however, which way you look at it. Identifying your priorities, making sure your data is accurate and complete, the processes that need to be put in place for this to be something that's repeatable. At Cognizant, for example, we start our reporting cycle earlier and earlier every year. This cycle we started in September of 2023, and we don't publish our disclosure until June, just to give you an idea of how much prep this can take. Of course, Cognizant is a very large company. We have over 350,000 employees globally. It takes time to, get all of that information and to validate it and take it through reviews. But no matter how big or small you are, you will only benefit from starting earlier. This is something that is, I think there's been a lot of politics attached to it, particularly where I'm based in the United States. Uh, I would say try to ignore the noise. At the end of the day, I think when you take a global look at it, it's quite clear where the market is headed, and what governments, what clients, what investors want to see. They've been very clear about their intent, and so I would say get started and get started soon if you haven't
Get started.
already.
Get started soon. It's a journey. Thank you so much, Aya. It has been really insightful conversation, and I'm confident also that our audience will really enjoy this conversation and find it insightful as I found it. Thank
Thank
you
you so
again.
much.
It was a
Thank you
pleasure
for the
speaking with you.
opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.